Welcome to the Soft Life with Sadie Baddies. Sadie Baddies is the antidote to mental health stigma, and this podcast is hosted by yours truly, Priscilla O. Adjaman. We are a virtual sanctuary centering Black and multiracial people, and we prioritize the mental and emotional nourishment that is the foundation of collective healing in our communities. Thank you for being here. Welcome back to the Soft Life Podcast, Baddies. I'm your host, Priscilla Opoku Adjaman, and welcome. If you are new here, welcome to our soft little corner of the internet. I am really excited to be back with a brand new episode. Last week, we had the honor of speaking to Alex Wolf, who has been a dream guest of ours since we started the podcast. And I mentioned in her episode that her podcast, the Alex Wolf podcast, actually inspired me to get into podcasting myself. It was just so profound and interesting and dynamic. Alex Wolf is a creative entrepreneur. She's also a tech philosopher and a pole artist. And she shared her journey into being in the tech field, in the tech industry and social media era, all the way in the 2018 and selling her first company. In 2018, she is also a best-selling author with a book called Resonate, which is a marketing book for creatives. And she is just a very interesting and dynamic person. I think as an entrepreneur, she represents the multidimensional, the multi-hyphenate people, and people who are not afraid to pivot and rebrand. So we love that. Her story is super interesting and inspiring. So be sure to check it out if you haven't already. Also, if you are not already subscribed to us on YouTube, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. We would love to have you. We have new videos every single week, multiple times a week. We have short form and, of course, our podcast long form videos every week. So please be sure to subscribe. We are so excited to see our YouTube channel growing, and thank you so much if you have already subscribed and have been engaging with us, leaving comments, interacting. That means more than you know, so thank you so much. Also, if you are listening on Spotify or Apple, please be sure to leave a review and rating for us. It really, really helps for us to grow the podcast and for other people to find it, discover it, listen to it, and also make it part of their day-to-day routine, their weekly routine. A lot of you DM us and say that you look forward to episodes every Monday on your way to work or winding down at night, doing your night routine. So we love that we are a part of your day and your week. So please be sure to leave us a review and rating if you haven't already. It means the world. So today I am going to dive into the topic of your intuition and your anxiety and how to tell the difference between the two. So if you're anything like me, you might have sometimes had trouble in the past distinguishing between your intuition and your anxiety. Both feel like very strong feelings, but there is a slight difference between the two. And the good thing about being able to distinguish your intuition and your anxiety, one of the best things about it is that you are able to make better decisions. You're able to make more holistic decisions and look at things from a bird's eye view versus just being reactive. The goal of having to distinguish between your intuition and your anxiety is that you can trust yourself more. And when you can trust yourself, you can open up your mind and your heart and your soul to making more guided and aligned decisions. So we're going to dive into it. If you're anything like myself, you might have struggled with distinguishing between the two in the past. I know I definitely have. And as someone who has struggled with anxiety, especially my teens and early 20s, I really didn't know the difference between the two. But looking back, there are such clear distinctions between my intuition guiding me and anxiety driving the boat. So we're going to dive deep into both. So let's start with what intuition even is, or what having an intuitive meaning. So having intuition, or intuition itself, is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. Having an intuitive meaning to something, or being intuitive, means having the ability to know or understand things without proof of any evidence. And obviously, this is something that's characteristics of being intuitive. or having intuition. So, intuition sometimes is regarded as something that is spiritual or even a bit woo woo. But the reality is, all of us have intuition as humans. We all have a center, we have a core. And even though we may not be able to name our intuition on a map or on an x ray, everybody knows when you know, you know. There are just some things that you just intuitively pick up on. The same way a mother or a parent might have intuition about their child and might know certain things about their child without them even telling them. We all have that trait and we all have that capability. I know so many stories of mothers. My mother herself, she has very strong intuition, but there's a bunch of different stories of people sharing communications with their parents, especially their moms, and showing the intuition of a woman, showing the intuition of their mom, and them being 100% right, whether it was for safety reasons or just being precautionary. We all have intuition. And when we lean into our intuition, we can protect ourselves. We can protect ourselves. We can also, like I said, make better and healthier decisions. But your intuition really is there to guide you and protect you. So, what does it look like to have intuition, or what does it mean to have a strong intuition? So, your intuition is based on your gut feeling. So, this goes again back to the definition of it not being tied to you having a specific reasoning or logic. It's a gut feeling. It's just something that you feel in your bones, in your body, in your soul. And another thing about being intuitive or having intuition, it's trust based. It's not fact based. It's not about bringing out the data, the numbers, all of the, all of the data and the rational part of our brain. When you are leading with intuition, or if you're following your intuition, you are following something because you trust it, because you have an inner knowing about it. Another name for intuition might be having faith. Some people use it interchangeably. Some people prefer the term intuition because faith can sometimes be tied to having a religious background or following a specific religious practice. But honestly, they're the same thing. Having faith and having intuition are go hand in hand. They're both trust-based characteristics that can guide you and help you to make better decisions, have better outcomes, protect you, guide you, etc. One other trait I've noticed about having intuition is that intuition and being intuitive has an approach of being more nuanced. It has a both and type of framework. It invites more complexity to scenarios and situations. It also invites more duality. So instead of you looking at things black and white, either or, which we'll get into, it really focuses on blending, some of those very sharp contrast when we think about decisions that we're making. So having intuition sometimes is not always like yes or no. It could be sometimes finding that beauty in the gray area or the liminal space. Another thing about intuition is feeling calm and clear about your decision. So your intuition is not always something that's can be obvious, but when you do make a decision that's based off your intuition versus your anxiety, there's a calmness to it. So that's a sign that you're leading with intuition, is when there's a calmness, you feel clarity, you feel a sense of relief after, most likely you are leading with your intuition. And lastly, your intuition feels right. It feels aligned. You might notice that there's some synchronicity with when you do make a decision based off of your intuition versus when you don't. You might realize that other things fall into place. So for example, if you make an intuitive decision to pick up your stuff and decide to move somewhere, when you're leading with intuition, you are going to feel more aligned. So maybe you pick a city that maybe at first you had a little bit of fear, but then you trusted your intuition and you realized, I actually love living here. I love this city. I love this neighborhood. And the next thing you know, you might get a new job in the same location, and you might make some new friends or reach out and find more connections in that area because you made that decision based off your intuition. Whereas sometimes when we don't listen to our intuition, we feel like there's some repercussions. We feel like there's a lot of resistance based off that decision. So those are the traits of being intuitive or having intuition. And of course, we're going to dive into what anxiety based or fear based decisions feel like and what they sometimes can make us do, the patterns of having anxious or anxiety based decision making or anxiety as a whole. So, anxiety, as you might be familiar, is the feeling of fear, dread, and uneasiness. Those are the three main characteristics of anxiety. So, one thing about anxiety is that it causes this sense of urgency and it can really make us feel like we're running out of time. Another thing about anxiety is that the voice of anxiety doesn't always sound like you. Sometimes the voice of anxiety sounds like an authoritative figure in your life or past trauma. It can just feel like not the real you. You know that there's something about that voice that doesn't sound authentic to you. And that is one way to tell that maybe you are leading with anxiety versus your intuition. And I know sometimes for people, it can be hard to distinguish that voice in our heads, right? Because we're so familiar with that voice. It sounds almost like us, but deep down, we know that that's not our voice. If you grew up in a household or you had a childhood where you had a parent who was really just breathing down your neck about every little thing you did, or they were hypercritical, or maybe they were even abusive towards you, it is really, really hard to separate that voice from your own. But in reality, we know that deep down, we wouldn't talk to ourselves in that way. Sometimes that voice in our head that sounds very aggressive, very angry, it can be because we've been raised to think that about ourselves. But deep, deep down, we know that that's not our real voice. Another trait about that anxious voice versus the intuitive voice is that the anxious voice is so scared, okay? The anxious voice is super, super scared. It's fear based. It's really focused on overwhelming or just persistent worry, dread, fixating on things. That anxious voice tends to ruminate. So when you have that thought process that keeps going over and over and over again, but you feel like you're actually not getting anywhere, you're just stuck in this loop of negativity, of fear, of not being able to take the next leap because you're so locked into that fear. Most of the time, that is your anxiety talking versus your intuition guiding you. Next, one trait about anxiety or your anxiety leading you is having this very black and white thinking. It's having either or, yes or no. Or sometimes it can just feel like this very binary way of approaching things. So, for example, it's like, if I don't get this job, then I will not have any food to eat. I'm going to end up on the streets. That's it. That's final. Whereas if you had a little bit more nuance, you would realize, okay, if I don't get this job, that's okay. I will get another job, or there is another opportunity that's more fitting for me. See that there's that gray area versus your anxiety that's like, no, this is the only way, this is the only decision, this is the only outcome that can happen. Anxiety is a lot more rigid than your intuition. It feels like there's a lot of focus on controlling the outcome versus your intuition is allows you to flow in and out, right? Sometimes your intuition, it feels softer than your anxiety feels very sometimes aggressive or feels like this overbearing presence. And of course, there's physical symptoms of anxiety too. You'll feel your heart racing. You'll maybe have heart palpitations. You're sweating. You get your palms are sweaty, or there's so many different ways that our body holds on to anxiety and to fear. And that is why I emphasize so often about somatic practices and releasing that fear, releasing that anxiety, that stress that we hold on to. So there are obviously different ways that people hold on to anxiety. I know for me, when I'm anxious, I hold it in my jaw and I hold it in my shoulders. So when I feel like, oh, my shoulders are really tight, my jaw's tight, I'm clenching my jaw in my sleep. Or, I mean, I also have a whole bunch of other physical manifestations of anxiety or stress that I hold on to. So I'm very aware of that now. And when I am leading with that, I take a note. And because I am able to be in my body, I can release some of that and say, okay, this feels like there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety around this. Let me take a step back and try to do some practices to release this so that I can make space for the intuition to come through. And lastly, of course, your anxiety is going to overall just have this really negative feeling. It's going to feel like the worst case scenario. So it's the opposite of feeling optimistic about something or being hopeful. Your anxiety is going to tell you that everything is falling to shit. Your anxiety is going to tell you that everything is wrong. You're doing everything wrong. Your life sucks. Everything is just terrible. But you also have to know that your anxiety is lying to you. And that is the distinction that is going to help us to move past those fear based decisions and have more of an intuitive way of approaching things. So, that is the distinction between the intuition, the intuitive voice, and the anxious or the anxiety voice. So, how do you move through it? How can you, besides knowing the difference between the two, what are some things that you can do to actually distinguish them so the next time you have a situation where you feel like you can't make the decision, or you're feeling indecisive, or you just feel like you're ruminating on it, or you just feel like you are out of touch with your intuition? There's so many ways to do this. And when I was early in my healing journey, this is something that I really wanted to focus on, because as someone who grew up being a people pleaser, one of the biggest circumstances, or one of the biggest repercussions of being a people pleaser, is that you lose your intuition. You're so focused on making other people happy that you forget what your own voice sounds like, or you forget what your own needs are. So here are 4 ways to move through the anxious voice or the anxiety driven voice to a more intuitive voice. So the first one is so important, and that is to stop letting jaded people speak fear into you. Some of us have people around us who are super, super jaded about everything in life. They really don't see anything positive from any outcome. And when you allow people like that to speak fear into you, that is only going to amplify your anxiety. When you are constantly surrounding yourself with people who are jaded or people who are negative, and I'm not talking about someone who struggles with depression, because having depression and just actually being jaded about everything else in life are 2 different things. There are some of us who have clinical depression, and we take, measures to make sure that we are not letting that bleed into all of our relationships. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking specifically about the people who, when you're around them, you just feel like there's nothing good that you can say that would make them feel, or at least react in a more positive way. Or one of the worst traits is that when you tell them something positive that's happening to you, they find a way to make it negative. They find a way to ruin what your hopes are or what your optimism is. And again, it's really important to, especially when you're in the beginning stages of something, whether it's a project, a creative, pursuit that you're doing, a job, even romantic relationship, I personally feel like it's really important to keep that sacred, keep that private until you are fully confident or it's confirmed. Because if you do allow people who are jaded to speak fear into you, you might actually just allow that fear to overtake you and not take the first step. So, number 1 is to stop letting jaded people speak fear into you. Number 2 is to do what one of our favorite mental health professionals, Dr. Tama Bryant from the Homecoming podcast. She's a therapist, and she's the president of the American Psychology Association, and she has a phrase that I love, and it's called taking a sacred pause. And taking a sacred pause means taking a deep state of reverence and being able to take a moment to appreciate and be aware. It's a state of awareness that comes from a slight detachment of your surroundings or wherever you are. So taking a sacred pause, that could be taking a deep breath, that could be taking a walk, that could be deciding to put your phone away for a little bit and just meditate, whatever the case is. Taking a sacred pause is one way to bridge the gap between your anxiety and your intuition. So one way that I love to do this is to connect to source and to connect to God. And I think that if you are a spiritual person, you'll understand this, but your source and your higher power is always going to be sending you messages, signals, downloads, and it's going to be more and more apparent. The more that you listen to this voice, the more that you are still and you have moments of having that sacred pause, you can begin to trust this voice more and more. So sometimes it can be hard when we have so much going on. We have the things to do. We have the to-do list. We have the trips. We have this. We have that. But when you take even a couple minutes a day to have those sacred pauses, it could be when you're showering, whatever the case is, that is really going to help you to be more familiar with it. And it took me a long time to familiarize myself with it because I had spent so much of my early upbringing just being a people pleaser, doing what other people wanted me to do, wanting to make other people happy, that I wasn't giving myself room to have a lot of sacred pauses. But the more I realized that this was actually going to be the thing that's going to help me and to guide me, I made room for that. So it's really about what you prioritize. And when you create space for the sacred pauses, you will get those downloads. You will feel your intuition become stronger and stronger over time because you learn to trust that voice and you learn to distinguish it between that fear-based thinking. Next is really, really important, and it is to stop asking everybody for their opinions constantly. And I know that it's really normal to do this, especially with social media and where we are right now with social media. Sometimes, you want people's opinions. Okay, what should I do with my hair? What outfit should I get? Should I order this on Amazon? Should I do this? Putting up a poll, getting people's opinions. That's fine, especially if it's just for social media engagement. But I'm talking about like big, big, big decisions in your life. Who you're going to settle down with as a partner, what job you're going to have, what career path you're going to take, where you're going to live, your surroundings, whatever big decisions you have, or what you're going to do just with your life in general. When you're constantly asking other people for their opinions, and it can start off very small. It could just be like, oh, I asked one of my friends about, this outfit that I want to wear, and they said I should wear this, but I really want to wear that. Trust your intuition. The more that you rely on other people for their opinions, the harder it's going to be for you to trust yourself. And one thing that I realized is that other people might have your best interest at heart, but they are not you. They are not going to live with the circumstances of making a decision and having to stick with it and having to see the outcome of it. So somebody that you love, and maybe it's your best friend that you feel like gives the best advice. And I truly think, of course, that's what friends are for. But if you're coming to your friends with every single decision you make and you feel like you need to have them almost like sign off or co-sign or vet whatever it is that you're trying to make a decision about, it is going to be really, really hard for you to develop your intuition. I also think just being intuitive in general is it's a trait that we all have, but the more that you lean into that part of you that is feminine, and I think all of us have masculine and feminine energy within us, but if we are leaning into the feminine side of us that has more of an intuitive approach about things, that has an inner knowing without relying so much on the facts, the figures, the data, it's going to be a lot easier when you listen to yourself and you don't always go and ask other people for their opinions. I am somebody that doesn't usually ask people for their opinions about things that are personal to me. So I might occasionally ask people, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that, etc. But most of the time I can trust myself. Most of the time I know what works best for me. And that falls into my next point, is one way to strengthen and make more intuitive based decisions is to know yourself, to spend time with you. Because when you know yourself, when you have spent time alone, when you enjoy your solitude, it is so much easier to follow your intuition, because you build a level of trust. You build a relationship with yourself that's built on trust. It's not built on fear. It's not built on insecurity. It's built on trusting yourself and knowing that you know the best for you. So when you know yourself, when you've taken time to date yourself, when you've taken time to spend time alone, to enjoy your solitude, then it's so much easier to share that with community, with your support system. So I don't think we should completely isolate ourselves or just write people off and not try to form healthy connections. But I do think that having time to yourself and building that self-trust is so important. And that is really what distinguishes you from just following what anyone else says, or even trying to people please or do what other people want you to do, and actually trusting yourself and making decisions that are based on trust and not just based off of what other people think or based on fear and anxiety. So I think what I like to say is you need to create proof of concepts. If you don't make a proof of concept that you can do something or that you can trust yourself, it's going to be really difficult to lead with intuition. Once you know you've taken a risk, and I think risk taking is one way to do this in a safe way, of course. But if you do take a risk, sometimes you don't know if you're going to fail, flop, or if you're going to fall on your ass. But when you do take a risk, it could be little micro risks. It could be saying hi to someone that you haven't said hi to today, or it could be a higher risk like moving out of state and doing or traveling, going on a solo trip, whatever it is. But when you do take a little bit of a risk, it builds that trust. And again, this goes back to spending time with yourself, knowing yourself. If you have the ability to solo travel, definitely encourage you to solo travel. Or if you don't have the capacity to do that right now, just doing little micro things every day, taking yourself out to lunch, taking yourself on a date, doing little things where you can build a healthy relationship with yourself, so that you're not constantly relying on other people to make decisions for you or to make you happy. And you can really build that level of trust with yourself. So I hope that this episode helps you. If you're somebody who goes back and forth, or maybe you feel like you're just super indecisive, and it's not because you're a Libra, just kidding. But if you are just somebody who is super indecisive and you really want to push through having those anxious based decisions, or you want to lead more with your intuition and just lead into that softer side of you that is intuitive and can make healthy decisions based on your intuition, then I hope that this episode helps you and guides you. Of course, there are a lot of different books and resources on this as well, so I will be sure to link them in the show notes. And I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next week. Stay soft. To stay connected, join Saddie Baddies on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and more, and sign up for our monthly newsletter on saddiebaddies.com to stay in the loop. Sending you hella love, and stay soft, baddie.